In this short video, I'm going to introduce you to the Curvature Tool and the Pen Tool within Adobe Illustrator CC 2020. Both tools are intended to draw paths. The Pen Tool is the original drawing tool in Adobe Illustrator, and the Curvature Tool is a relatively new addition. I think it was released somewhere in October 2015-2016 timeframe. The Curvature Tool looks like the Pen Tool with a little mouse tail. The Pen Tool and the Curvature Tool, I happen to work in Essentials Classic with my toolbar my toolbox in 2 rows, and the two tools sit right next to each other, the Pen Tool and the Curvature Tool. I'm actually going to start with the Curvature Tool because it's my belief that the Curvature Tool works the way the Pen Tool was originally intended to work, but didn't until they got the technology to be able to code it. So the Curvature Tool, I have replaced most of my Pen Tool work with the Curvature Tool, to be completely honest. All paths in Illustrator are a combination of anchor points and lines that stretch between anchor points. So with the Curvature Tool, I'm going to click and place an anchor point. Then when I click again, this is going to be the apex of my curve. So it's going to be the top point of my curve. By default, the Curvature Tool makes lovely curves in between anchor points. And you can see that as I continue to click, Illustrator figures out where those curves would affect that line and how they would interact. And you're saying, well, you know, that's great, but I don't always want curved lines. How do I work with this tool? To start with, it makes open paths, which means I always like to think about a path like a gate or like a fence in a pasture. There are fence posts and there's fence stretched between them. The anchor points, these circles, are the fence posts, and the path, the line in between them, is fence. So to start with, there's not a gate on the fence until we close it, and you can see that the cursor has a little circle behind it now. That indicates that when I click this time, I will be closing the path. So I'll be adding the gate. Now we have a closed path. So there's my first crazy shape in with the Pen Tool, or with the Curvature Tool. My first click is going to start the path. If I double click, this is actually going to become a corner. So now I have a straight line. When I single click, this is going to go back to being a curve. So if I want to make a scallop, for example, it's going to be single clicks on the bottom and double clicks on top. I can hit the escape key to end my path, and this, in this case, is an open path because it doesn't close. As long as I have the Curvature Tool selected, when I come back in here, it's going to want to add to it. So there I can close that path. Now, let's just imagine that I'm going to get rid of this crazy shape down here. Let's just imagine that I actually wanted one of these to be a curve. With the Curvature Tool, I can come back into any one of these anchor points, double click, and it will be converted from the corner to a curve. Likewise, any curve point, I can double click and it becomes a corner. So I find this tool particularly easy to use. I really like it. If I need to add a point to a line or add an anchor point to an existing path, all I have to do is click and drag. It'll add the path and create the curve all at once. If there are modifier keys that we can use with every single tool in Illustrator. If we hold the Shift key while we're using the Curvature Tool, it constrains the next placing to a 45-degree angle. So I can do 90 degrees, 45 degrees, 180 degrees, any increment of 45 degrees. And there's a quick little figure 8 fish shape. If I hold the Option key while I'm drawing with the Curvature Tool, it is going to allow me to move a point. And it also, so this is the Alt key, the Option key, it also will make the next point a corner. So I'm going to miss out on that curve, But in the event that I didn't mean to do that, of course I can go back in and add the curve right back in just by double clicking on the point. And last but not least, this is one of my favorite tricks in all of Illustrator. This actually works with all of the tools. So I'm going to quick make a selection of, in this case, the direct selection tool, which is the white arrow tool. Allows me to move individual anchor points or manage or change curve control handles. And the direct selection tool is the last selection tool I've used. Now I'm going to go back and get my curvature tool. When I hold the control key or the command key on a Mac, it's going to activate whatever the last selection tool I had selected was. And it's a toggle, so as long as I hold down the control key, I have the selection tool. As soon as I let go of the control key, I'm back to my curvature tool. This hotkey or shortcut key works with every tool in Illustrator. It's a toggle between the last used selection tool and the current tool that I'm using. If I had chosen the group selection tool and then gone back to the curvature tool, now it's the group selection tool or the move tool, any of the selection tools, whatever tool I've used last, it activates that tool. So that's the curvature tool. The hotkey for the curvature tool is Shift plus the tilde key. The tilde key is the upper left-handmost key on your keyboard. It's next to the number 1. And so the Shift and the tilde key will automatically access the curvature tool. Now let's take a look at the original version of the curvature tool called the pen tool. The pen tool has its own drawer of tools. So if you click on the pen tool icon in the toolbar, click and hold, it's going to pull out the drawer. And then if you click on the little drawer front, you can pull the whole drawer of tools out. And the tools that belong to the pen tool set are the pen tool, the add anchor point tool, the minus anchor point tool, the delete anchor point tool, and the anchor point tool itself. So the hotkey for the pen tool is the letter P, and the pen tool makes, again, anchor points and paths, fence posts and fence, if you will. And by default, the pen tool makes straight lines. If you want a curved line with the pen tool, you have to click and then click and drag. If you click and drag with the while you're still holding the mouse button down, you'll get 2 handles. These are called curve control handles. And the curve control handles control the angle of the curve. So the pen tool can be used very similarly to the curvature tool. Where the curvature tool, I think, well, I don't know, I think it's to some extent personal preference. I've discovered I really like the curvature tool better. If I need to add a point to a path, I can do one of 2 things. With the path selected, if I put my cursor over the path, you'll see that I get a little plus sign. That's going to add an anchor point. Likewise, if I hover over an existing anchor point, I get the minus anchor point tool. You can also access those from the toolbar. And this last little tool is called the anchor point tool. And the anchor point tool allows you to create curves where there were not curves. So here I'm going to click on the anchor point and click and drag. I get the curve control handles, and then I can also use the anchor point tool to separate those handles. So if I click once, it's going to give me curves. If I click on an existing curve, let's get a nice curve here. Oh, right down here we've got a curve. It's going to turn it into a corner. So very similar to how the double clicking with the curvature tool works. One of the nice things about the anchor point tool is it does give you the ability to separate those curve control handles, and then you can make all kinds of great curves with the pen tool. With the pen tool, if we hold Shift while we're drawing, that's going to constrain that next anchor point to a 45-degree angle. So any part of the 45 degree, 45, 90, 135, 180, 225. That's the best I'm going to do with math, all the way back to 360. Or, I don't know where my end was, so we'll just hit escape to finish that path. If I am drawing and I hold the Option key in the middle, so Option Alt, it's going to give me that curve control, or the anchor point tool that allows me to manage those curve control handles while I'm drawing. And then when I release the Option key, Alt Option key, I'm back to drawing my path. And last but not least, just like in the other case, if I hold the Control key, it's going to toggle whatever the last selection tool that I had was. In this case, it is the Direct Selection tool. So that is the pen tool and the curvature tool in Adobe Illustrator CC 2020.